All right, some of you are still eating, and of course that is of course a wonderful thing. And the lady over here named Midge, who is at the table here, is a lady who prepared all this wonderful food for us. Thank you so much.
No Costco did the soup.
Very good.
I just doctored it up.
All right, well, we have a speaker who's got a lot to say. I heard a preview a little earlier this morning. It was really a compelling talk, so we want to give him as much time as possible. For the introduction, we have the wonderful Julie Walker from our church staff here. Let's say thank you to Julie for everything she does.
Okay, well, I'm very excited that Brian is here today. I'm not going to say too much because I want you to hear as much as he has to say. But I have always been impressed by Brian and what Hope Shelter does. And you guys know that I'm out doing a lot of things with a lot of different organizations. But during Lent, our series is on the inward journey home. And I'm going to share one story that Brian just recently shared with me. I might steal his thunder, but we have so much to talk about. He was saying that they lost electricity for a day or two at the shelter, and some people had to go over to a hotel for a night or two. And when they got back, when Brian saw them, they said, "We couldn't wait to get home." And it's amazing when you think about it that people who are homeless, they really do form a community within the shelter. And Brian and his staff over at Hope Shelter, that's important to them. And that's not the case at every shelter. And I can say that from experiencing it, that it's not the case at every shelter. But he really cares about the people who are there, and his goal is to help them find homes and help them stay in the homes. And so it's one of the reasons why I love what Brian and all of them over at Hope Shelter are doing, and why I'm so excited to introduce him today so that you all can learn more about what they do at Hope Shelter and about all of his experiences. So with that, here's Brian Wright.
Thank you. Can you hear me with this mic? I can hear it, so. All right, I'm going to put that one down. I appreciate Julie talking about that home aspect. I'll give you another story that's kind of along that line. We had a church that put in new windows in our shelter. So we had these broken down plastic windows, in all honesty. In some places they were just patched. And this church came in for a tour and they said, "You need new windows." I said, "Well, yeah, I guess we do." They said, "We're going to do that." And so they put in these new windows. And when we got the new windows in, some of the shelters, some of the guests, I think, didn't know that I knew they got new windows. So I came back into the shelter and they said, "Hey, come here, we're going to show you this." And they're showing me the windows and they're saying, "Look what we got in our home." And they often refer to the shelter as their home. And we do try to make them feel at home there. One of the things that I will talk about from time to time is about how that we try to keep people engaged in the services of the shelter. If you can imagine, we get a lot of people who come in for a day or two, but we get a lot of people that come in for longer periods of time. We're able to work with them. I always feel bad when somebody comes in and they're only there for a day or two, because the need is there. But we're not, and my feeling is that we're not able to help them because we didn't get enough time. And sometimes somebody comes through for a day or two this year, next year they come in for a week, and a couple of years down the road. You know, it depends on how many nights were so bad that they didn't want to be outside. We had a particular set of gentlemen that came in. They were camping out, and they came in for just the coldest days of the winter. And after doing that for about 4 years in a row, they started talking to us about resolving their homelessness. They started talking about where they could go after this place. And that's possibly because it takes some time to build trust. And that's one of the things that we do. So many of you might not know who we are. So we're a homeless shelter in Pontiac. And we're on the northeast side, sort of. If you go around the wide track, Baldwin comes off there. And actually, Cesar Chavez comes off and then Baldwin. Okay? If you know where the Baldwin Center is, we're across the street from the Baldwin Center. We actually used to be inside the Baldwin Center years ago. We rented space there. And when the building across the street became available, we bought that building and moved across the street. And you may find this interesting. After having been in the Baldwin Center for a number of years, just in the winter, mind you, we built a real trust and a good relationship with the community. When we moved across the street, we got some nasty notes and calls about how unscrupulous it was for us to build a shelter across the street from a great shelter that they loved and respected. They didn't realize it's the same shelter. We have a great relationship with our neighbors because we're a source of support for them as well. It's not just the shelter. We live in a neighborhood that is very poor. You've got people who are very vulnerable to becoming homeless themselves. You've probably seen these little pantry boxes that will be out in front of houses or buildings and churches. And people come by and they put something in, they take something out. We've got a pantry box that an Eagle Scout produced. And I have to say, when that first went up, I thought, isn't this a cute idea? I wish it would possible that that would actually be helpful and useful. I had no idea. We fill that thing 3 times a day. And we had another Eagle Scout that saw that project and said, you have such a small box. Why don't we build a bigger box and put right next to it? And I thought, well, that's nice, because then maybe we could fill it once a day, right? Just fill the whole thing. We filled the whole thing 3 times a day. What I find interesting is that people from the neighborhood will put stuff in there. Things that they get that they just don't want, don't need. They know somebody will have it. And it's this sense of community that's built around this pantry box. It's just interesting, the community that does exist among people who are really struggling to survive. And I appreciate that struggle. And so, let me ask you this. If you were to find yourself homeless today, some disaster, some crisis, but you're actually find yourself homeless, how long do you think you would be homeless? What sorts of resources would you reach out for? It's interesting that a lot of people feel pretty exempt from that. But I'll give you one example. If you watch Netflix, there's a documentary called Dirty Money. And in that, it tells a story about Scott Tucker, who came up with the payroll loan system, which was deemed to be a predatory lending. And he actually went to jail for that, by the way. His wife, after he got put into jail, all of their assets were frozen, and what do you think happened to her? She became homeless. It can happen. My question is, if that happened to you, what resources would you use? Somebody tell me, how long do you think you would be homeless if you personally found yourself homeless? How long? Not long?
Why? We have our family.
You have your family.
Yeah, that's.
You know what else you have? You probably have a credit card in your pocket. And believe it or not, a lot of us can rely on credit. Or some people who haven't lost their job, by the time I get paid, I'll have enough money to get myself going again. I say that, yes?
I'd like to interject a comment. We've personally experienced a situation here at Griffin Hills a few years ago when South Oakland Shelter was coming here,
Mhm.
my sister-in-law and I were here in the morning serving breakfast, and my sister-in-law, Patrice Lockwood, who's a retired dentist, looked over at this woman and she said to me, "I recognize that woman." And it so happens that my sister-in-law's 3 children graduated from Detroit Country Day, and the woman who was there in the homeless program for 1 week here at Kirkland Hills was also a mother, former mother of Detroit Country Day, and they had worked together on a couple of different projects. And when they had the 2008-2009 recession, her husband's business went into bankruptcy, they were divorced, and she became homeless. So it could happen to almost anyone.
It really can.
Yes.
And that's an important thing for us to acknowledge. You know, because a lot of times we think that we make a lot of assumptions about people who find themselves homeless. In the story I was telling you about Scott Tucker, his wife found herself homeless, and of course she immediately resolved it by getting some friends to put them up in one of their homes, because at her level, being a billionaire family, they had billionaire friends, and they had friends who said, "Well, we're not using this home, why don't you just live there?" And other friends who said, "Well, you know, I can't put you up at my house, you've already got a house, well, why don't I just contribute?" And she was, I can't remember how many thousands of dollars were given to her each month to live on. And I scratch my head and say, wait a second, you're not even paying for housing, and you need that much money. I mean, it's more money than I make in a year, jeez. But, you know, she talks in this video, by the way, about how traumatic the experience is for her. And I want to point out to you that trauma it's like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so is trauma. And she did find this to be very traumatic. And one of the things that we deal with in homelessness is the fact that people are very much traumatized by the experience. It's a mental health crisis that they're really experiencing most of the time. And mental health either causes their homelessness on many occasions, or it results from the experience. So when we start dealing with homeless services, 100% of our clients, although I'm going to quote me as saying 99, okay? 99%. Because I don't trust anything that's 100%, right? But it's pretty much everybody who goes through the experience of becoming homeless, they're traumatized. And they're they're edgy, they're stressed out, they're easily triggered by any number of things. And so one of the things that we try to do is we try to give our staff training on how to deal with traumatized people. So it's called trauma-informed care. We also try to learn methods of de-escalation. So when somebody's ramping up and getting angry and upset, you don't know what triggered them. Let's dial it down. Let's calm them down. And we use a lot of those kinds of techniques. People will ask me sometimes, why not just do this with volunteers? And I'm going to tell you that it takes a very skilled employee to keep people engaged and keep people calm and keep people working with the system. It's not an easy thing. And I had a guy who told me one time, he says, I want to donate to your program, but I wanted to go to things like meals, or maybe the heat, the water bill. Water bill was really big to this guy, by the way. He wanted me to give him 3 unpaid water bills. I want them to be unpaid. I said, do you want the shut-off notice too? But he says, I just don't want any of the money I donate to go to things like salaries and things like that. I said, so let me be very clear. What you're telling me is you want to make sure we feed them well, we give them a warm, safe place to be, clean clothes, but you want to make sure they stay homeless and we don't resolve that. Because that requires an employee. It's the employee at our shelter that makes the difference. It really does. And when you compare our shelter to other shelters, I'm very proud of the comparisons. Our outcomes are 3 times as good as the average shelter in Pontiac, or excuse me, in Michigan, average shelter in Michigan. We help about 250 guests each year, more than 250, sometimes it's 300, sometimes, but it stays above the 250 mark. 250 guests a year exit our shelter to a place they can call home. And our recidivism rate, the way they measure it, is about 10%. The average shelter in Michigan, the recidivism rate is about 35 to 45%. That's average. So we're doing a pretty good job there, but I think it's because we're working from a trauma-informed de-escalation, and we actually personalize the kind of work that we do with somebody. I worked at a homeless services program years ago down in Detroit, and we had what we call a person-centered plan. Anybody familiar with person-centered plans? Okay. As you would expect, it's supposed to be centered on this person. I had 38 men on this one floor, and would you believe that all 38 men had the exact same person-centered plan? What are the odds of that? It's not very person-centered. I will tell you that we literally sit down with each individual. We ask them, where's your family live? Do you have a doctor? Where's your doctor live? We're going to connect you with a doctor. Where do you want that doctor? Let's work that out. Do you have a job? You know, some people don't realize that many of our guests have jobs. They just don't make enough money to pay their rent. So we try to figure out what things are going to work together the best. How are you going to transport yourself? Are you going to use the bus? We probably ought to be on a bus line. So we try to get people in neighborhoods they're familiar with, places they want to be, and as a result, when we get them there, they tend to stay. That takes a little bit longer. The average stay in the average shelter in Michigan is about 20 days. Sounds pretty good, right? 20 days in and out. The average stay at Hope is about 42 days. So we have them twice as long. We get more people sheltered, and more people stay in that shelter, in that housing. I think it helps to have them there longer. You see what I'm saying? We shouldn't be trying to do this as fast as we can. Now, I will tell you that on this report card that they give us, where they compare all these different shelters, they consider the shorter time better. It really isn't. We've got to take a little bit more time and resolve it permanently. Our goal is that this will be the last place a person experiences homelessness. The last place. So one of the other things I want to tell you is that I consider Hope to be more of an advocacy organization that runs a shelter, as opposed to being a sheltering place that tries to engage in advocacy. And here's why. Back in 1999, a gentleman died on the streets of Pontiac because he was not allowed to be in the shelter that was in Pontiac. There was a shelter, but they wouldn't let him stay because he'd been drinking. We really just felt like that's not a good enough reason for somebody to be out in the cold and die. And so Hope started as a means of preventing people from dying. That was our only goal. And that's why it was, if you look at our official name, Hope Hospitality and Warming Center. It's a warming center. They're only open in the wintertime. So when it gets the coldest, that's when you're going to see those shelters. So after a few years, we noticed that we were seeing the same number of people. Nobody was dying, so we met that goal. But we were seeing the same people, and they kept saying, how do we make a difference? Well, we decided we needed to do some case management. Well, you can't do case management in a couple of months in the wintertime. We needed more time. We needed to be a year-round shelter in order to make this happen. And so we did that. And I think it was 2014 that we first went year-round. And since that point, we've hit that mark of about 250 guests exiting to a place that we call home. That's all it took, was to go year-round and to spend more time. By the way, one of the other things we did is we brought the case management inside the shelter. Normally, sheltering and case management are two separate things. You go across town for case management. We brought it into the shelter. We made it a focal point. And originally, when we started doing that, that was paid for by private funders because the grant funding we had wouldn't pay for that. It was outside the scope of sheltering. Well, now it's part of the scope of sheltering. We've advocated for changes in how the funding works and how all the shelters work, and we've really advocated that this becomes a standard throughout the country of sheltering and case management inside the shelter. And that has been happening across the country. People are doing that more and more. Low barrier shelter. That means that a person may not be sober. Guess what? Most people who come in at night who are fully loaded, if you will, by morning, they will be pretty sober. And we can work with them then. It's interesting that a lot of times when a person stops worrying about where they're going to eat and where they're going to sleep, a lot of that behavior dials down. Now, don't be surprised when a homeless man has a drink. I don't know about you, but if I found myself homeless, I do not want to experience it in its full glory, right? Numb me up a little bit, help me pass some time, because it's a big weight. But it's a traumatic thing. A lot of people, after work, they'll go home and have a drink. Is that a big deal? I don't know. But it shouldn't be a reason to put somebody outside. So as long as a person is not a risk to the safety of the shelter and other people, they get to stay. And so we work with folks, and we work often with the hardest folks. If you are homeless and you're carrying everything on your back, chances are you're going to lose a few things. Among those, your ID documents. You can't open a bank account without an ID. You can't get a job without an ID. You can't apply for a housing unit without an ID. These are important things. So Hope also led the charge in getting ID free to people who are homeless. So if you happen to be homeless, you can go into a Secretary of State and you can show them a letter that shows that you're homeless. They can pull a drop-down window and your ID is free. You can get a free birth certificate in the state of Michigan. As long as you were born in the state of Michigan, you can get a free birth certificate as well. You've got to have that in order to get your state ID. You have to, you have to get those documents in order to get your Social Security card. It's all these documents, and there's hurdles to get over. And so those are some of the hurdles that we jump with them right when they first come into the shelter. We also try to connect them with health services, primary health care, and mental health services. I'm convinced that 100% of our guests are dealing with mental health. They will do well for a long period of time and then decompensate and then just go off the rails. They have a hard time holding things together, and that becomes one of the bigger issues. Now, I will tell you this. Many of us know somebody in a family that doesn't do well on their own, doesn't work real well, but maybe the family takes care of it. Do you know anybody like that? I've got an uncle like that. I'm convinced that if the family didn't take care of him, he'd be homeless. Well, in some definitions of homelessness, that's still considered homeless. There was a period of time when they considered homeless if you were sleeping in somebody else's house. You know what happens if you're an adult and you're sleeping in your mom and dad's house, in the basement? That used to be considered homeless as well. And mom and dad used to think that too. Get out! How long are you going to be here? Nobody's going to pay you to play video games. It's kind of interesting. So there are a lot of things that we try to integrate, pull together, and give people the full service of what they need. So I always tell people, when you're supporting Hope, you're not just taking care of the people that are with us right now. You're actually freeing us up to look at the other things that are not being paid for that need to be done. One of the things that we're arguing for right now is called source of income discrimination. If you're familiar with that, that is where a landlord can say, you've got a Section 8 voucher. It's going to pay for your rent. But I don't really like renting to people who get their rent paid this way, so I get to discriminate against you. Unless you personally earn enough money, 3 times your rent, I can discriminate against you and not rent to you. We have people who have Section 8 vouchers and they cannot find a landlord to let them stay in that apartment. And there really isn't a valid reason, because that landlord will be guaranteed payment. We're also working to expand and publicize what's called a landlord mitigation fund. And that is a fund that says that if you rent to people who are low income and they trash your place, you can draw from this fund to make yourself whole. Believe it or not, that fund already exists. But it's a small fund. And we're arguing to expand that and make it more public so that more landlords understand it. Some landlords don't want to do that because they just don't want to rent to those folks. It's unfortunate. We've already mentioned before, those folks could be any of us, right? Any number of us could become homeless. We've had people in our shelter who were surgeons. We had a Grammy Award winner in our shelter. We didn't know that until after he passed away, because I don't know if you know this, but sometimes when people tell you stories, you don't immediately believe them. But when their families show up and tell you, oh, did you know he was a Grammy? We talked about him when we were at another church that was doing a jazz concert, and the jazz musicians knew him. I won't try to say his name. I didn't know him personally. I'm not a big jazz musician fan, but they knew him. It's interesting that it could be anybody. Lawyers have become homeless. What causes homelessness? Sometimes it's a medical bill. Sometimes it's a breakup. A divorce will sometimes cause somebody to become homeless. There's a gentleman that was in our recuperative care shelter who had, he was sort of a construction foreman. And he traveled around doing road construction. And he was down in Texas. He's from the Waterford area, but he was down in Texas leading a crew. And one day, he was driving and looked at his cell phone. And he hit an embankment, hit the cement barrier, and found himself permanently disabled. He also got addicted to painkillers. And over a short period of time, I say short period of time because it was a number of years, but it was like 3 years. He pushed his wife out of his life, pushed his kids out of his life, and had a parent that passed away, and he just wasn't coping well with life. And next thing you know, he's homeless. And then he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Sad thing was, he came to our shelter, and we put him in the recuperative shelter, a place for him to recuperate from his illness, go through his chemotherapy treatment, and we fully expected that this man was going to go into hospice within another month or 2. Do you know that man got well?
You got well?
He got well. He went through chemotherapy just fine. He mended his relationship with his family. Now, his wife didn't take him back, but he did get his own apartment afterwards. And he comes by the shelter every now and then to let us know that he's still alive. He says, I just wanted to let you know, I haven't died yet. Because they didn't expect him to live. It's amazing what can happen when you give people a little bit of help at the right time. So years ago, when we were still a warming center, we had a couple of gentlemen that came around. They were hanging out with each other. And they got out, they were probably drinking, got frostbite on their toes. They actually went to the hospital and got their toes amputated because it got that bad. Got infected. You know, people, I don't know, some people aren't quick to go to the doctors anyway. But if you don't have health insurance, you really kind of avoid that until the last minute. So the long and short of it is the fact that they went through a series of amputations because each time they would have a surgery, and when the hospital deemed them ready for discharge, you can't stay here. So they pushed them out the front door and they wandered the streets, aggravated their condition, got reinfected, and they ended up with another amputation after another amputation. And the reality is, we watched this happen and realized that what they needed was a place to just stay and recuperate. Eventually, both of these gentlemen died. And the hospital claimed that they had spent $1 million that they could not recoup. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but that was the claim. The reality is that had they been able to recuperate someplace, not only would they have probably not died, at least not the way they did, they probably wouldn't have had all of those amputations. After the first amputation, they would have probably healed up completely and then done just fine. But they died. So we decided to create a shelter where somebody could recuperate. And so we opened up our second shelter, which holds about 15 people. And so it's a place where somebody can go and they meet their medical goals, fully recuperate before they get into the regular shelter. And by the way, we work on their housing issues while they're there, and most of the people resolve their housing before they leave there. It's something about being a captive audience. If you're recuperating, you've got no place to go, I can make a lot of progress really fast, right? Oakland University did a study on that shelter the first 2 months we were open. They looked back at the previous 2 months and the 2 months after that person had been in our shelter. And they said that because hope existed, that we had saved the local hospitals $185,000 with that stay. It's pretty impressive when Oakland University does a study and says something like that. We took that study over to the hospitals, and guess what they said? How many of you think they agreed with it? They did. They agreed with it. Now, how many of you think they wrote a check? They did not write a check. Although some of them have written some checks from time to time. Never what you'd expect them to do. But we appreciate all that we can get from them. That's nice. But it was nice to have that confirmed that it made a difference. We have guests that just didn't know how to get health care any other way. So they used the emergency room. We have one guy who'd spent over a 90-day period, he'd had 30 trips in the ambulance. Partially because he liked the red lights. They were really cool. But partially because he was having these panic attacks. And one of the things that we did was we got one of those, what do they call them, pulse oximeters? Yeah. And taught him how to read them. He thought he was suffocating. He'd put that on and he'd say, oh, I'm okay. We've got a sign. I was at Beaumont Hospital and I saw this traffic sign, red, yellow, green. When you call ER, when you call 911, when you go to the urgent care, when you just go to see your primary care physician. And I looked at that and I said, that's a nice document. I bet we could use it. I took a picture of it, we recreated it. Now we sit down with each of our guests and we say, what kind of experiences have you had? That would fall under a red light. You should call ER for them. What's this one? That's a green light. Just call your primary. So we're teaching them how to use the healthcare system. Because we don't want them to not call, we just want them to know who to call and when. Because it's not that I mean, healthcare is very important to all of us, right? So that's an important thing. So there are various teaching tools that we have, and we're always trying to teach our guests the best way to use the services that are available. So it's more than just trying to resolve this moment of homelessness. We're trying to find a permanent solution so that they can have their own home and stay in that home, build a home, build a legacy. We had a veteran that had been with us. He had, after many years of being on paying out child support, that he claimed, and I don't know, you go, people tell you stories, you don't know how accurate they are. He claimed that one summer, the summer after he'd been in the service, he sowed some wild oats and ended up paying child support to 3 different women. Probably true. I can see that happening. And he paid that, but because of that, he was never able to really establish himself very well. And so he often found himself homeless, couch surfing with a friend, finding various different ways. And he got to the point where he didn't have to pay the child support anymore. But he just needed somebody to help him figure out how to make the next chapter of his life come together. And so we connected him with the Veteran Services. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but about 38% of the veterans that get connected to Veteran Services as homeless folks make that connection through hope. Oftentimes, veterans don't like to identify themselves at first. They're a little bit ashamed. I'm a veteran, I shouldn't be in this situation. There's a lot of blaming that goes on. It's my fault, I shouldn't have done this. But we try to avoid the blame. Let's just get to the solution. Who cares whose fault it is? So this gentleman connected with some services, and they helped him to buy a home. By the way, it's a home that none of us would have bought, right? But they helped him to fix it up before he moved in. Got a new roof, got some remodeling done, got a new kitchen done, I mean, it was a nice house when he moved into it. And he said, for the first time in my life, I'm going to be able to invite my children to my house. He says, I cannot tell you what that means to me. We want to find solutions to people and put pride back into their lives. Help them to live a life that's worthy of living. Something that's exciting. Because believe it or not, there are some great people who just haven't had great opportunities. We talked earlier about the different kinds of, how long it would take you or I to become, to resolve our homelessness if we found ourselves homeless. One of the reasons why you find many of our homeless folks have so much trouble is because the real issue is their poverty. Generational poverty. If many of us can borrow from our parents or from our relatives, or many times family wealth is handed down from generation to generation. For many of our guests, the only thing that's been handed down from generation to generation is debt. And some of them think they have to pay that debt. They don't realize that if the person's dead, they try to do the right thing, but they don't have the resources to make a difference. And sometimes there's brilliant minds who just haven't had the opportunity that other people have had. And so in many ways, we need to try to find ways to elevate their opportunities and give them a chance. Hope is trying to connect people with the right opportunities, the right resources that'll get them where they need to go. And so we always try to take it one individual at a time, figure out the right solution for that person, and connect it. And I'm always thrilled when guests come back, they want to volunteer with us because they appreciate the help that they've gotten. We had a woman last week. Her mother had passed away, and at the funeral, she ran into somebody who was homeless, and she put her in her car and drove her to Hope and said, "This is the only place I know where you'll get the help you need." It touched my heart. She's in the middle of yet another crisis, and she's helping somebody else. I'm telling you, we got some great people out there who just have had some bad luck. And when we get to partner with people like you, I'm just thrilled. I really am. I'm thrilled at what we are able to do together. Now, coming up, there are some opportunities. You'll see on our webpage, we're launching a new campaign, Sponsor a Bed, Transform a Life. You can sponsor a bed for $20 a month, or you and 3 friends for $5 a month. Now, somebody says, well, why are you going after a $5 donation? Because I think if you get thousands of people involved, number one, it helps us to spread the word. Because I also want people to know how easy it is to help someone. In all honesty, don't try to help them yourself. Connect them to the shelter. We can help them. That's what we're training for. That's what we're working to do. So it helps us to spread that word. The other thing is the county is working on what they call a Blueprint To End Homelessness. And Hope is a big part of that. We're going to be one of their lead organization for dealing with homeless services. And they would like us to build a new shelter. One that will decongregate the guests. Right now, we're in one big room. We got 60 guests in one room. The snoring alone will drive you crazy. The problem is that the air circulation, you can pass disease really well. We worked really hard, and we were able to use motel for isolation when people got sick, and we were able to keep COVID out of the shelter up until December 7th, believe it or not. Just this past December. We kept it out that long. And since then, we've had some issues. We actually had an employee who brought it in. She works at another shelter, works with us on the weekends, and she came in for her Friday night shift, Saturday and Sunday shift. On Monday, she found out that her workplace had a major breakout. And then she got tested and found out that she had COVID. Guess what? She had it while she was working. And that's how we got COVID in there, and we've been chasing it around the building ever since. I wish there was a quick and easy way to get that out of there. Although last week we had 2 people. One was a repeat. Did you know you can get COVID more than once?
Yes.
We got one person who's had it 3 times. 3 times. Just when you think you know, you don't. It changes. So they want us to decongregate the shelter, and what that means is not having 60 people in one big room. So it could be a private room, it could be a semi-private room. Mel Trotter over in Grand Rapids has a new blueprint. Their new construction program gives private rooms. They're small. Boy, are they small. But they're private rooms. Kind of like a dorm room. And so we're working on figuring out what that's going to be like. And so the county's going to filter some of the federal money that comes through the county, and they want to designate that. They want to support the whole project. The problem is that money never pays 100%, right? So we don't know exactly how much we're going to have to raise, but we're going to have to raise a lot because the architect tells me this is going to be about a $12 million project. It's a little less than 12 million, but he says by the time, it actually, the way costs are going, he says expect it to be at least 12 million. I don't know if that means that we're going to have to raise 6 million or what, but your help would be certainly appreciated on that. We're going to try to get a lot of help around to see how many people can kind of help us with that. We also have some strong operational costs, which is the sponsor a bed. We're really trying to raise funds to help fund our basic operations. I'd also like to raise an endowment fund to deal with emergencies that arise, so that I'm not standing there going, hey, we have an emergency, can somebody rescue us? I'd rather fix it immediately, because you know that if you don't fix it immediately, usually the cost goes up. So there are some things like that we're going to have coming up. Now, I know that there's a lot of other projects that a lot of people like to connect with. People make sandwiches, and believe me, we appreciate that. We appreciate that. We've had to change a lot of how we operate over COVID, and that has been a major help, just being able to fund the feeding of our shelter guests. People have found a lot of ways to do that. We've got some folks that like to do projects. They come around, they do some yard cleanup, painting things, and repairing things. There's a lot of different things. There's certainly lots of opportunities. And I want to connect with people on whatever is really meaningful to you. And I really believe that if we can all do something that's meaningful to us, the impact grows exponentially. Together, we accomplish great things. We really do. And I just want to tell you that I appreciate you guys. I think last year you guys gave us a grant of about $5,000 or $6,000. I'm sorry for not having that exact number, but it was very helpful, very helpful. We certainly appreciate you guys. And I hope that we can develop a stronger partnership and move forward together. And you know, there's certainly opportunity. And I appreciate all that you guys have done. All right? Thank you. Yes, questions?
You have a question or two?
You're in the city of Pontiac. I wonder about the employees of the city of Pontiac, whether they are involved, whether they assist you, or whether there's virtually no connection, no help.
Well, you know, I don't know if you know this, but Oakland, Pontiac has been an interesting city. We don't have a lot of direct employee connection with Oakland County, but I will say the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, we are very connected with them. We have some of the best trained sheriffs in the country. I will put them up against anybody. We have had people that have come in, and I know that in another community, when I was in Detroit, you never wanted to see the police inside the shelter. Oh my goodness. They were going to come in and take control, right? Oakland County Sheriff comes in, calm as can be. And I'm going to tell you, calmness breeds calmness. It really does. When you can hold yourself that calm. We had a sheriff that came in, and we had a guest that was just having a meltdown. We couldn't cope with it. We did everything we could do to de-escalate, and he kept having a problem. Called the Oakland County Sheriff. The guy comes in. And he says, "Sir, what can I do to help you?" The guy takes a swing at him. He just brushes it away. He says, "I'm here to help you. What can I do to help you? Just tell me what you need, and I will help you." And then eventually the guy hauls off and he really kicks it. And I'm going to tell you, I know that had to hurt. And the guy says, "Sir, again, I'm here to help you." How do you think that resulted in?
Much calmer than if he had an accident.
That sheriff walked the man out the front door, put him in the car, and took him to the hospital, which is where he needed to go. No handcuffs. I'm going to tell you, I love the Oakland County Sheriff's Department. Best partner we could ever have.
If I can say one other thing while you're talking about the company. So one of the things that if you ever run across someone who is needing shelter, some shelters, it's very hard to get through to them. And once their beds are filled, then they won't take anyone else. And it's a real problem, especially in the winter. So I obviously get people call me sometimes and say, "We have somebody who we've just met and they're homeless. How do we get them into a shelter?" And one of the great things, and it reminds me of the sheriff because they have such a good relationship with the sheriff's office. They have 60 beds, but they have worked it out with the sheriff's office because that's like the rule. You can only have 60 people sleeping here. But in the winter, they will not refuse anyone, and maybe year-round. But in the winter is when I really care about these people not being out on the street. So what they've done is sometimes they have 100 people in their shelter, but they have other people in the sitting area, and they'll sit them up until the sleeping people get up, and then they change the bedding and let the people who are sitting go into the shelter area so that then they can switch. So they don't want people to be on the street, and they're trying to do everything. And the sheriff's office has allowed them to be able to do that because of like the little bending of the rule, and because they care about the people and not saying no to them. And so I think having a good relationship with the sheriff's office, but also the fact that they care about the people and they really don't want them out of the street.
Yeah. So if somebody calls me from Southfield and says, do you have any beds? And we're full, I'm going to tell the guy, I'm full. You're in Southfield. Find something, closer to Southfield. But if you show up at my door, you're in. That's just kind of the way it is.
That's wonderful. Over here, one last question, man.
Well, I have a comment and a question. So the comment strikes me that what you're doing is a lot like what Dr. Paul Farmer did. It's sort of pragmatic philanthropy. I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to say you should hurt you. I'm going to treat you. But the comment is, the question is, can you scale this up for like San Francisco, tent city? I mean, or do you vision that it has to be a bunch of smaller?
I think it needs to be smaller things, because quite frankly, I really think that if our shelter were to get bigger, I think it would be much harder to deal with and hard to keep that calm atmosphere. Which, by the way, I'll just tell you this in short. The county wants us, or the government is trying to get us to decongregate shelters so that they won't spread disease. So smaller pods, if you will, so that they don't spread disease. I think what that's going to do is also bring about a calmness to the shelter that I think is going to even greater enhance our outcomes, which is not the original plan. But if you get too much bigger, I think you would lose that. One of the big problems is the access to affordable housing. If we had more affordable housing, more units in Oakland County, we could move people out of the shelter much faster than we do now.
All right, Pastor Edwin, would you come up, please? If you have any announcements to make, please let us know, and then conclude by praying for the shelter, praying for Brother Brian.
Sure. Thank you, Henry. Thank you so much for being with us. It is wonderful to hear you, and I invite everyone to be in prayerful discernment about ways that the Kirk could connect and serve and support. And what could that look like, and what does sacrificial giving look like in the face of so much need? I will be heading soon to Detroit, to Hart Plaza. So for anybody who is able to make it, it's 2 p.m. For the Unity Rally for Ukraine, Prayers for Ukraine. But if you're not able to make it at 2 p.m., I just welcome your prayers if you would just pray in that spirit of unity. So let us pray today as we go from this place. God, we're so thankful today for the gift of life, the many blessings you've given us. They're just incredible. Food and shelter and clothing, things we can sometimes take for granted. We're thankful for friends and for family and for just the countless ways that we get to experience one another's company and this world, and our hearts are full. We especially thank you for those who are working to serve at the margin, those who are working to serve the outcasts, those we might not always understand, sometimes we might even be afraid of, but we know they are your children. They are made in your image, and you love them more than we could ever love them. And so help us to love them more. Help us to serve our brothers and sisters who are struggling with houselessness and struggling with mental health and job loss and financial challenges of all kinds. Those who are sick, whether in body or in spirit. Help us to be your hands and feet in this world by the grace of you, O God, by the power of your Spirit. Encourage us, give us imagination, give us the strength and the wisdom to do the good work that you have before us. Bless my brother here as he goes from this place. Bless his work, bless his ministry, bless all those who enter the shelter. And bless all those who have come to hear about this issue. Put in their hearts what you're calling them to do. And all these things we ask in that precious and mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everyone. And thank you.